why? And so much of it comes down to the why. Why do you want to tell a story in general? Not just that story, but why do you want to tell a story?
Hmm.
Why are you wanting to get on this stage right now? Why are you wanting to get on this podcast right now, write this book? Whatever it is you're doing, why are you doing it?
Hmm.
And what are you trying to get people to learn or to understand?
Okay.
And when you focus on that why, and if I'm here saying, I want you to understand how to tell a really great story out of something silly, how did I learn that?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Yollab Central. Today, I have with me Sara. So, Sara, would you like to tell our audience why they should be excited about this conversation today?
Yeah, well, I'm super excited for this conversation today, and hopefully other people are too. I talk about storytelling and the science and the art of it, and how we use our stories to connect with other people and to grow personally and professionally. So, if y'all are interested in stories and want to tell your story to more people and tell it better and in ways that really drive connections, then get excited because that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay, now since we're talking about storytelling and how to tell our own stories better, this is something that I've not been able to perfect and I'm still working on. But then, when you work with so many people, what is the one problem that you see everybody struggling with?
The biggest thing with across the board is just not understanding the simple fact that they have a story and that their story is worth telling. I think the thing I hear the most often when I say, like, well, you need to tell your story, you need to be telling stories, like, well, I don't have a story. And that blows my mind because, of course, you have stories. You've been through so much in your life. And
Mhm.
I think what they're really saying is that their story isn't headline worthy. It's not a story that we would see on the news.
Mhm.
And we live in this 24/7 news cycle of being bombarded with headlines. So if our story doesn't sound headline worthy, we
Mhm.
immediately just think, well, this isn't worth telling. And that is 100% incorrect. No matter who you are, you have a story.
Okay, now this feeling of insignificance, if I can call it, that lack of confidence or that feeling of being insignificant, that our stories are not worth enough, does it originate from a lack of confidence, or it's just that seeing that everybody else's story is so flashy and so nicely polished up that, yeah, I should not be telling my story, that kind of stuff?
I think it's a combination, and I think it can vary across different people. But I definitely think part of it is just the culture that we live in right now with like social
Mhm.
media and that 24/7 news cycle that we're just always bombarded with stories.
Mhm.
And especially with social media, because we're not sharing the mundane. We're not sharing. I mean, we used to, if you remember the beginning of Facebook, where your post was, I'm eating blueberries. Like
Yeah.
that, I kind of miss that
Mhm.
because now everyone's social media is their highlight reel. It
Mhm.
is just the big and the best moments.
Mhm.
And so for everybody watching, it's like, wow, they're doing so much. Like every day for them is this amazing experience. And I'm eating blueberries. That's not worthy of talking about.
Mhm.
But if we step away and remember that these are just the moments that they're choosing to highlight, and there's so many other moments that they're not talking about.
Mhm.
And I honestly think that we need to stop just sharing our highlight reel.
Mhm.
Like my social media is a little bit more of a blooper reel than a highlight reel. And I share the things that I mess up and I share the embarrassing things. And even quite literally, I'm no longer hosting a podcast, but when I was, I would put the bloopers before I even put the highlights
Mhm.
because it's real and people need to see other people being real so that they know that their actual, just real life experiences are normal
Yeah.
and are okay.
Now, this thing about authenticity, right, which I feel these days is a little lacking on social media. Um, it's just that people are looking for authenticity and they latch on to the one influencer that they feel is a little authentic, obviously not as authentic as they feel, but then again, no hate to the other influencers. But then again, uh, we are yearning for real authenticity when it comes to social media, right?
Yeah.
And trying to tell a story like that, obviously it takes courage, right? To tell regular things on a daily basis to the world. How do you come up with that? And should I call that confidence or just the steadiness to do that?
That's a hard question to answer, honestly. And I still feel that fear of rejection, that fear of I'm going to tell people about this and they're not going to accept it the way that I want to. And I don't think that ever goes away.
Hmm.
I think that we still live in a world of internet trolls and we still live in a world of judgment. And I think the more that people are just willing to do it and willing to put themselves out there, the less prevalent that's going to become. Because if every single person is out there just being real and talking about the real things that we have been avoiding talking about, there's not enough internet trolls out there to tear them all down. Like we will be the majority.
Hmm.
And one of the things too with like the fear of it is a lot of it is vulnerability and being willing to be vulnerable and share stories that are difficult to talk about. It's not all highlight reels and it's not all things that we really enjoy talking about. We have traumas in our lives and we have things that we're not proud of or things that we don't like to just share with strangers out there, which is completely fair.
Hmm.
But I think with that, it kind of comes down to just not making it about yourself anymore,
Hmm.
which sounds a little counterintuitive because like it's your story and you're talking about yourself. But if you think about the person that's listening,
Hmm.
and if you've been through this and it was really hard for you, with the amount of people in this world, there is a very high chance that more people have been through something similar. And they're also struggling to understand it and to talk about it. So if you're able to talk about your experience and people who can relate to it are able to hear that, that makes them feel seen. That makes them start to understand their own experiences and makes it a little easier on them.
Hmm.
So if you're afraid to be vulnerable and really share those difficult stories, just don't think of it as you talking about you. Think of it as someone else needs to hear this and you're doing this for them.
Okay. But being vulnerable one to one is one story, right? Being vulnerable to one person that you select and feel comfortable being vulnerable with is okay, and something people are okay with the idea, right? But then being vulnerable on the internet and opening up yourself to, I don't know, all the whatever kind of people are there, right? Uh, just the kind of crap that goes out on the internet when people start commenting and they don't want, I mean, having the capacity to do that, right? How do you build that from your experience, or if you have seen somebody else do that? What's the one thing keeping people sane?
Yeah, I think if it's something that you're really struggling with, start smaller. And one of the things that I've seen a lot, I've worked with a lot of speakers, I've been to speaker conferences, I've judged speaker competitions,
Hmm.
and a lot of speakers they get on stage and they tell that one story.
Hmm.
And there's specifically a speaker competition that I judged, and they had 3 minutes. And the only rules were you have to tell a story and it has to have a message at the end.
Hmm.
And every single person told that one story, that like big childhood trauma story, that like that hardest thing they ever went through story, that time they almost died story.
Okay.
And those are the really hard to talk about stories. And there, I mean, there would be not a dry eye in the house. People are sobbing listening to this, and it's like it's touching people and it's amazing. But then they get to the message part at the end, and and that's why you need a business coach. Like it's something that was just so unrelated.
Right.
And it just felt like I really want to tell this story, but it doesn't connect with my message. So let me just kind of shove something on the end because this is the rule of the competition.
Hmm.
And we see that a lot. We see people really gravitating towards that one big story because they say when you're telling a story, you need that emotional connection. You need to tug at their heartstrings. You need to make the audience feel an emotion.
Hmm.
And that is completely true. I have studied the neuroscience of storytelling, and you need to make people feel the emotions so that it triggers the empathy and the oxytocin and all of that. But there are a lot of emotions out there.
Yeah.
Sad is not the only one. So I think when we're struggling to be open and tell these stories and we want to make the audience feel something, let's maybe shift to a different emotion. You can want to make the audience feel joy. You can want to make the audience laugh. And I think maybe just stepping away from that one big story
Yeah.
and finding those little stories make it a little bit easier. And that's kind of my focus is the little stories and turning almost like the mundane into great stories in the way that we tell them, because those are the ones that people are going to relate to anyway.
Hmm.
Like you can make someone feel something by telling this big traumatic story, but the whole room isn't going to be able to relate. But if you tell those smaller stories, those everyday little wins and losses, more people will relate to that because it's just the human side of life.
Now, this is something, I mean, this is a different perspective that I'm hearing about telling the mundane story to actually move people, right? Um, I've thought about doing it quite a few times, but then obviously changed my mind for very obvious reasons. But then again, when you're trying to tell the mundane story, the everyday thing to everybody else, what is the thing that you're keeping in mind so that people actually gravitate to it or relate to it, right? Because there's so many experiences out there in the world.
Yeah, I always kind of go back to Ira Glass, and he has a
Mhm.
quote that great stories happen to those who can tell them.
Okay.
And I think when we learn how to tell a great story, anything becomes a great story. And
Right.
that's why it is so important to just learn how to tell the stories. But I think we always have like those bigger stories, or if it's we're talking about those success stories, it's like the rags to riches. And I'm
Yeah.
telling you that this is where I started and here's where I ended up. And that's amazing and that's inspirational. But that doesn't tell me how, and that doesn't help me do it. So instead, like, what did you do on Tuesday? What happened on this day that what decision did you have to make? What mistake did you have to fix? What were the actual like smaller moments that added up to actually get you to this
Hmm.
end of the story that you're talking about?
Hmm.
Because you can inspire me by telling me that you did this, but you can help me and guide me and lead me by telling me how. And the how is not one story. The how is a million little stories that just come together and form this book of experience.
Hmm. Now, this string that happens, right? The string of life that we try to put into a story. There are different ways of doing it. Somebody likes to emphasize the funny parts because somebody is good at doing that. Somebody wants to tug at the joyous stories because it makes people happy reading that. How do you pinpoint or do you actually select that you want to focus on these stories? I mean, these type of stories. Should you be doing that when you're trying to tell one?
I think we need to take a step back
Okay.
and and instead of like I want to tell this story, why? And so much of it comes down to the why. Why do you want to tell a story in general? Not just that story, but why do you want to tell a story?
Hmm.
Why are you wanting to get on this stage right now? Why are you wanting to get on this podcast right now, write this book? Whatever it is you're doing, why are you doing it?
Hmm.
And what are you trying to get people to learn or to understand?
Okay.
And when you focus on that why, and if I'm here saying, I want you to understand how to tell a really great story out of something silly, how did I learn that? What taught me how to do that? And that's what I did build my career on. I had a stupid story about an embarrassing tattoo that
Mhm.
I got on vacation, and it turned into me getting on one of the biggest finance podcasts in the world, learning from his interview style how to tell that in a way that was valuable. I then launched a company, I wrote a book. I had all of this came from that. But it tied back to I got a really stupid, regrettable tattoo during a bar crawl in Ireland.
Mhm.
So that's the story that I tell. That
Mhm.
story has been told on stages, on podcasts, everywhere. Literally is the premise of the book I wrote. And is that my biggest, most fundamental story in my life? No, that's a stupid story I would tell in a bar for laughs when I bartended in college.
Mhm.
But I thought about what I'm trying to get people to understand, and that's the story that helped me understand it.
Mhm.
So you're just teaching people what you learned, actually just the way that you learned it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, right, you have to contextualize, right? But in this age of social media and where a lot of stuff is just AI written, right? And optimized for being written on the social media or created in a manner that people get hooked. And that's where hooks come in to the conversation, right? Where I want to bring in hooks. So writing mundane stories is one thing, but then getting people hooked onto and getting them to read it, obviously, right? Because that's where the whole fear of rejection is. Because if nobody reads it, it's as good as nothing, right? There's no point writing it. Uh, how are you doing it? Is there anything specific that you look at trying to create a hook, or do you feel that it's just something that needs to be done because of the algorithm?
I think I think the algorithm stole that from just normal human brains. I don't think the algorithm invented that because it's always been that we want the hook.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at like action movies, like James Bond movies don't start when his alarm goes off in the morning and he just gets out of bed and goes to see what is happening in the world. It starts in the fight scene. It starts in the middle of the action.
Yeah.
And I think if we learn how to structure a story in that way,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be able to draw in attention no matter what that story is.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I said before, great stories happen to those who can tell them.
Yeah.
And my method of storytelling is basically storytelling in reverse. And
Okay.
I start with the punchline pretty much. Like I mentioned, I have this stupid tattoo story. The reason that became a story that I am almost famous for was because I was trying to get someone else booked on a finance podcast. And I had no idea how to pitch podcast guests at the time. I now do it professionally, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I had stalked the host of Stacking Benjamins, Joe Saul-Sehy, for 3 days at a conference. Literally stalked him like hiding behind a book I pretended to read at a cocktail table while I watched him across the room. Like it was bad. And after 3 days, I finally get him alone and I try to pitch my client to be on his show. And I just start listing, he's an expert in this, 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 and this. And Joe says, that's great. I don't need an expert. I need someone with a cool story. And in that moment, all I needed to do was hook him so that he didn't walk away and end the conversation there. So
Yeah.
I said, do you want to hear about the time I got a tattoo of a penis while I was in Ireland?
Mhm. Right.
And it worked.
Yeah.
And it worked a little too well because I got booked on the show to tell that story. But it's because I started with the punchline. I
Yeah.
started with the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly he now wants to know, okay, well, how did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And I go on the show to tell the story that led up to that. But the hook is what had people already listening.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think that the story that you're telling isn't interesting enough, just change where you're telling it from, change the structure. Stories don't have to be told chronologically.
Right.
And as someone like me, and I know you actually had someone on your show recently talking about late diagnosis ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm in that club too. I figured it out also via TikTok
Right.
in my mid 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that my brain works is different than normal people,
Yeah.
typical people. I call myself neurospicy. But when I'm listening to a story, my brain is not actually taking in each moment of this story. It is trying to race you to the finish line. I want to know what's going to happen next before it
Yeah.
happens. I want to be able to guess. I hate reading mysteries because they drive me crazy. And that makes it really hard for me to actually pay attention to details
Oh.
because my brain is too busy trying to figure out what happens next.
Hmm.
So, in a way, if you tell me the ending of the story first and you hook me with the ending of the story, while you're telling me the rest of it, I can actually pay attention because my brain is not trying to race you to the finish line because it's already there and I already know what's going to happen. So it gets rid of that suspense at the beginning and lets you just kind of live in that moment and
Hmm.
pay attention as it goes.
Okay. And to the okay, there are a lot of story writers out there on LinkedIn, to be very specific, right? They just love writing long posts and have you hooked on the first one, and then they'll sell you a course at the end of the post, right? And have some gibberish written in between. How do people actually end up doing that? Because that gets them nowhere at some point, I feel, right? The content does not match up to the hook, or the hook does not match up to the course that they're selling. Why are people actually doing this? Do you see a problem there, or where is it coming from?
That's an interesting question. And I think it depends on each person and how they're doing it and if it's even working. And if it kind of sounds like the speaking competition I was talking about, where they tell this long story and then they get to the message and there's no relation. And we're getting bombarded with those.
Yeah.
Are they effective?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see them being very effective. And I don't, I could be wrong. I haven't looked at stats for it, but I don't see that as being very effective because yes, you got me to read your post, but then I get to the end and it's a letdown. It
Hmm.
doesn't
Yes,
it doesn't have the impact that you are going for. And
that's
I
right.
call that AI generated authenticity,
Hmm.
which in itself just doesn't make sense. And it's because we just go into ChatGPT and here's what I'm selling and here's a few details of my life and now write me all these posts. And I think the people who are doing that, let them do it. They'll figure it out that it's not
Okay.
working and they'll find something else to do. But if they want to do it differently,
Hmm.
then they just need to change the stories that they're telling and stop relying on, like, if you're trying to sell a course about anything about like digital marketing. Stop telling me stories about your childhood dog and tell me stories about success you've had in digital marketing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the disconnect is there is a time and place for every type of story. And not every story is really that personal.
Yeah.
And we say to talk about ourselves and talk about our experiences, but that does not only mean in your personal life. Stories that happen in your professional life are just as important. It just depends on the goal of the moment, what type of story you're trying to tell, what goal you have for the story, what purpose, what message. So you can use in like in those cases, a lot of the times the stories that are going to be more effective are going to be things like case studies and testimonials and the insight stories and I'm learning, I'm teaching you how to do this, and I learned it through this experience and this experience and this experience. So just talking about those, is it going to be as heartstring pulling and will there be tears hitting the keyboard as people read this? Probably not.
Yeah.
But they are going to be seeing, oh, wow, that person accomplished that, and I want to be able to do that. And if they've already done it, they must know what they're talking about. I can learn from this person.
That's
So I think people, for some reason, are thinking the only goal of storytelling is emotional connection, and that's only one piece of it. So actually think about what your goal is
right.
and structure and choose your story to reach that goal.
Now, there's something contrary to this idea that I want to ask you. I mean, that I have something in mind is like, what happened to the idea of storytelling for the sake of storytelling, right? Where there was no goal attached, you were just telling an anecdote for the sake of talking, right? I mean, we were there on social media just for the sake of sharing, right? And not specifically doing that. As you mentioned earlier, right? The mundane things, right? Sharing about eating blueberry or having a chocolate in, I don't know, Disneyland or probably somewhere else, right? So that kind of thing. What happened to that idea? How did that come to die out?
I don't know if it's necessarily died out. I think it's the venue. So
Okay.
LinkedIn is a business social media platform. So people
Yeah.
are there trying to build their brands and their business. But I do think even without it being like when I say that there's a goal, I don't necessarily mean that it's a business goal.
Hmm.
And so I do think that no matter where and to whom you are telling a story, there is still a goal there.
Yeah.
And you're not just telling the story just to fill the silence. Or maybe you are, but that's still a goal. Your goal is to fill the silence. But there is always still a goal. There's always a reason that we do what we do. And I think that is the basis of it because for the longest time, I mean, stories have been told since before written language. And we
Yeah.
see cave paintings from the
Yeah.
cavemen, and those are stories. Stories are as ancient as civilization itself.
Yeah.
And throughout all of that time, the goal of storytelling was human connection.
Hmm.
So when we are just telling a story in conversation, what we're trying to do is connect with the person that we're talking to. And even though that's not a necessarily a business goal, like it could be someone that you want to eventually have a business relationship with, or someone that you're dating, it's someone you want to be friends with, it's your family. You
Yeah.
want to connect with them. And storytelling is the way to do that. Human connection is built on shared experiences. So when you tell a story, you're bringing people into that shared experience and telling them that you have this shared experience. And there's actually a phenomenon in neuroscience of the brain. It's called neural coupling.
Yeah.
And when you hear somebody telling a story, your brain is actually starting to release neurons in the same way that their brain was when they experienced it.
Hmm.
So by telling a story well enough, you're able to almost trick somebody into thinking they had a shared experience.
Right.
It's like when you're watching a scary movie and you're safe in your home, the door's locked, you have a blanket on you, but yet you're feeling so tense and scared and you're shaking. That's not because you're in danger. It's because your brain is reacting the
Reacting
way
to
the brain of
this.
the character is.
Hmm.
So if we look at that instead of my goal is to sell you something, my goal is just to connect to you.
Yeah.
But in order to have that connection, you still need to know how to tell the story well.
Yeah.
So I think storytelling still becomes important. And if you've ever talked to, like, I use my mom as an example a lot. I feel bad. I feel like I'm bullying her, but she is the worst storyteller you'll ever meet. And she takes 15 minutes to tell a minute long story.
Okay.
That doesn't connect because I now have 4,000 details I never needed because moms are the president and CEO of the Too Many Details Club. And if you're able to learn how to tell a story just in casual conversation, you're able to better form those connections.
Hmm.
And that's going to have you hit that goal, even when it's not business related.
Hmm. Okay. Now, just to keep it crisp, if there was one tip that you wanted to share, right, with everybody else, one small thing that you should be keeping in mind when you're telling a story, something that a lot of people are not, right? What would that be?
Storytelling is not a innate skill for a lot of people. And if you don't feel like you are a good storyteller, that's okay. You're not alone.
Hmm.
Storytelling is something that can be learned. And it's, I mean, like we were saying, like it's important no matter what you're doing, if it, even if it's not business related, just building relationships with people, it is important. So it's something that you should try to learn,
Okay.
if you can. And learning it doesn't have to be going back to school.
All right.
Watch people and listen to people who are fantastic storytellers. And the examples and the suggestions that I always make is just go watch stand-up comedy.
Mhm.
They are some of the best storytellers in the world. And it's because they walk into a room and they have to make 100, 1,000, 10,000 people relate to the same stories. So
Yeah.
they need to take those mundane moments. That's why the classic, like, what about airline food? And they talk about traffic, and
Yeah.
they're talking about mundane things that every single person in that room can relate to. But they are artists in how they tell it. They're
Mhm.
so great at how they tell it that it sounds more exciting than it is.
Mhm.
So you can learn how to be a great storyteller, learn from the greats, watch stand-up comedy.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for joining me in on this episode of Your Lab Central. It was amazing how you could tell the different ways in which and why storytelling is so important. So, thank you so much. Before we close, where can people get in touch with you and how can they know more about it?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, my company is called Favorite Daughter Media, and I did put out a book on storytelling in back in April. And if you want to check it out, go to openthisbook.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarah. To the audience who's been watching and listening intently, if you liked what we talked about, do leave a like. The comment section is open for suggestions, perspectives, and any other queries or whatever is going through your mind. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe if you've not subscribed yet. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.